This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with Lee Schulz, Chief Economist of the Livestock Division at Ever.Ag, begins today's show. He discusses the current market, retail beef prices, hay production and prices, and why placements are difficult to project. Continuing the show is K-State Water Resource Engineer Jonathan Aguilar as he provides a checklist of things people with pivot irrigation systems should work on checking off before it gets below freezing. Another segment of Faces in Agriculture ends today's show with Amanda Clausen from Jackson County. She describes her poultry operation and how they have grown in the past few years. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from the Chief Economist for Ever.Ag's Livestock Division, Lee Schulz. Lee, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be back again.
Lee, what are we seeing for the cash cattle market?
Well, as we looked at trade last week, I think we could term it as lower. Cash prices were down, anywhere for dress prices in that $4 to $6 range on a live weight basis, roughly down $2 to $3 from the prior week. And that really follows through, at least when you look at the near term. Live cattle futures contracts, both December and February were down compared to prior week levels. We did see a little bit of support as you looked out into more of the deferred futures. I think there's a little bit of rebalancing there as you think about where those prices are relative to each other and where we think supply expectations were. If I had to look at a bright spot for last week's trade, it's certainly in the feeder cattle futures. We did see those up roughly over $5 if you look across the contracts. Certainly, you have to point to some of that being lower feed costs. Corn prices were down for the week. So I think certainly, that's contributed to that. But also cash trade for feeder cattle has been relatively strong, as you've seen. Certainly demand from wheat pasture grazing, that has really picked up here. And then I think overall an indication that we're seeing a tightening of supplies. And I think that has certainly been supportive of prices. If you have to think about a factor, weakening on this cattle market, it's looking at the box beef trade. We've seen really the whole carcass under pressure. We've seen cutout prices down last week, depending on how you measure it, either Friday to Friday or for the week. So Friday to Friday, we're down almost $5 on the choice cutout, about $2.50 on the select cutout. If you look at the weekly averages, we were down even more, over $7 on choice and over $4 on select. So we're seeing some seasonal pressure here. That really the only positive or bright spot's been the holiday rib from the cutout levels. And we've seen slaughter levels, still, below year ago levels, but not enough support of box beef prices. And so we've seen that lag a bit. And I think you're seeing that fall over to the fed cattle trade.
And Lee, when we're looking at prices, what are we seeing for retail beef prices from a recent USDA report?
Well, USDA provided us another update. We're always backward looking here. So we got the October data. USDA's Economic Research Service gave us their estimate of a retail price. And for beef, they do two series. So they have an all fresh retail beef price. And then what they have is an equivalent choice beef price. Both of those prices for the year have averaged over $8 a pound. The all fresh price is right at $8 average for the year. For October was about $8.08. The choice for the year has been $8.21. It was about $8.11 per pound here for the October data. Year to date, those prices are up anywhere from 3 to 6% year over year. We actually did see the choice price slightly lower than October compared to October of last year. And so, I think it's further confirmation that, we've both seen stronger prices driven by kind of the supply situation we talked a little bit about, but continued strong demand. So that's helped hold these prices where they're at. And, the strong demand level, I think, is over the whole protein sector. Beef is not alone in that. So consumers have been willing and able to pay these relatively high prices. Now, I think there's a lot of debate about how high prices go next year as we think about expansion in the beef cattle herd, the tightening of supplies, and what that means for retail beef prices.
And another report that came out from the USDA, this one coming out on November 8th, looking at hay prices and hay production.
So this would have been part of our crop production report released on November 8th. And this is one thing that just kind of piqued my attention looking at where the hay numbers were at for the year. I think just cutting to the chase, all hay production was reported up about 7% compared to this would be 2023 levels. And really this was driven by increases in yield. So acreage numbers have been slightly down, but yield, similar to a lot of production this last year. If you look across soybeans and corn, we've seen very strong growing conditions, and which has led to very strong yields. And also overall production has been larger, and that has pressured prices, right? So we've seen prices down nationally, realizing hay prices, when you look at them, they're very regional in nature, right? We don't truck a lot of hay around in relation to other crops that we produce, but overall nationally prices are down. That's going to be impacted by region to region. But I think the takeaway is, we have available supplies of hay. And so that is not going to be necessarily, really detrimental to feed prices, right? As we see lower hay prices and higher availability, we'll get a better idea of what that availability is next crop production report in early December, because we'll get the December 1 hay stock. So that's really what our supply is available for winter feeding, right? And depending on how harsh and long of a winter, that available supply will be critical for carrying us through winter and into the next growing season.
And Lee, a report that's coming out this week, Cattle on Feed, and you recently wrote an article kind of looking at last month's Cattle on Feed report, and it's involving placements. And before we hop into it, what are placements?
Placements are steers and heifers that are placed on feed, that are fed a grain-based ration that will be intended to grade choice or better, and that will be marketed as fed cattle. And so that's kind of USDA's definition of placements. And so it just kind of gives us a general benchmark, right, of cattle that are being placed into feedlots. And that gives us an indication then of what future marketings will be X months down the road.
Lee, your article is titled Placements, Most Important Yet Most Elusive Cattle on Feed Report Number. And why is it the most important and the most elusive?
Well, I think as we talked about it, it's very important because it drives all other numbers. So if you think about the number that's placed in the feedlot is going to drive the number of cattle on feed, and then it's going to drive those future marketing. So, I think that's really what, when you look at a cattle on feed report, that's a lot of times what the market reacts to if there's a surprise over or under in that placement number. The elusiveness is part of that as well. Right, is I think we've a lot of times been surprised what the cattle on feed report comes out as far as placement numbers compared to what expectations are going into the report. So prior to a report, a few days before a report, we get usually a good estimate of where we expect those numbers to be. And right, those are called pre-report expectations. And when you look at the placement number expectations in particular, there's usually a really wide range, right? So there's a lot of different guesses. And I would argue a lot of really educated guesses of where that placement number could be. And then a lot of times the actual number or USDA's estimates may even come outside that really large range. And so that oftentimes causes a large reaction in the market because it was different than what those expectations were.
What reactions can there be if that USDA number is higher versus lower than pre-report expectations?
So this is what we would call kind of a bullish or bearish report, right? So if those placement numbers come in much smaller than what we expected, so USDA's number is smaller than the expectation, that would be bullish then, because that's going to say future supplies are going to be smaller. Now, the opposite, and which we've kind of seen recently is sometimes that number USDA has comes in larger than those expectations. And so that would be overall bearish, kind of all else equal to market prices. And really the main objective of my article was to really talk about why it is difficult to estimate those placements. I think one of those factors is when you think about how USDA collects and reports the data, placement weights are 600 pounds or smaller or 1,000 pounds or heavier, right? So there's a really wide range of weights that producers can both buy from a feedlot standpoint and sell from a cow-calf or stock or backgrounder standpoint. And so those decisions are driven by a lot of different factors. And because of that, I think it makes it harder to estimate where those placement numbers can potentially come in. One other factor I think kind of related to that, and this was part of the last cattle on feed report, it won't be in the cattle on feed report released this week, is the number of heifers on feed. And so we've routinely seen the number of heifers on feed be close or at record levels. And so right now you have roughly 40% of the cattle on feed are heifers. And right, so that number obviously dictates what placements are. And in the current environment, I'd argue there's kind of a tale of two stories. You see really strong feeder cattle prices. So that's pulling cow-calf producers to market those calves as feeders, right? And you're seeing relatively profitable conditions for cattle feedlots. And so they have incentive to place more cattle on feed, including heifers, right? But then you also have these really strong calf prices are incentivizing expansion in the industry, right? And so there you can see, well, do producers start to retain some of those heifers and eventually produce more calves? Well, we've gotten confirmation that it's the former, not the latter. And so that's led to more heifers on feed and has helped increase those placement numbers and hold those cattle on feed numbers compared to prior year levels.
That was the senior economist for Ever.Ag's livestock division, Lee Schulz. I will link his article in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing winterizing irrigation systems with K-State Water Resource Engineer Jonathan Aguilar. Jonathan, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be able to share some information to some of our listeners right now.
Jonathan, why is winterization of pivot irrigations something that producers and growers should really do?
So it's really nice to talk about winterization right now, particularly that the temperature is going down. So as we know, most of these irrigation systems are designed to be able to carry the water. However, we don't want that water to stay on that system during the winter time because it's going to expand and it's going to force itself to break anything that is not tight enough to be able to withhold the water that is going to freeze. So we would like to say that the first thing that they should probably do is remove that water from the system as much as possible so that we are able to reduce the damage that it could do as this water expands as it tries to freeze up the system. So that's the first thing that you will also would like to do. The second thing is that we would like to make it ready for next season. So we would like to make sure that, hey, it's planting time, we need to irrigate, and we would like to have our system up and running immediately. So we would like to, one, make sure that there was no damage from the expanding water inside those irrigation system. But the other thing is that there's other aspect that needs to be protected as well, like rodents, like wind when there's no weight on those irrigation system, and also some other wildlife that might be around. So one of the things that we also tell people is so with the wind, we have to park it as much as possible towards the prevailing wind direction. So we would like to make sure that it will not catch as much wind as it possible, because since there's no water in it, it is relatively light. So we would like to make sure that it is able to withstand that wind that comes our way. And in Kansas, we don't have any wind, right? But no, I'm just kidding about it. We do have wind that are really very strong. So we would like to make sure that it doesn't topple itself during the winter time. And then, as I mentioned, the wildlife, both making sure that the electrical system are protected. Make sure that they are closed or protected. And then also the livestock that may be grazing in the area. So make sure that you either fence it or some kind of a protection that will avoid being rubbed on or being chewed on by wildlife in general. So those are I think the three things that should be done to be able to winterize the system.
And taking a look a little bit more into a few of those, when it comes to parking the pivot somewhere, is it important to maybe keep it away from trees, but also in an inaccessible spot?
It is right. That is correct. So we know that the trees are also some of the places where wildlife try to hide during the winter time. So we don't want them to be easily accessible to those wildlife that are seeking refuge on those tree lines. So that is also very important. But again, if that tree line is also your protection against the wind, we don't want it to be too far away from that windbreak or from that wind protection to be able to protect that system from being blown away or being toppled by the wind.
And when it comes to draining these systems, is there a way or caps or ends that they need to make sure get fully drained?
Yeah, so just make sure that there are a lot of drain valves that are available for irrigation system. So it may be at the very end of the system, or it may also be at the very start of the system. So try to find any valves there that you could drain. Most of those valves are really designed to be able to drain out any other water. If you think that there is still some water in your system, many of those drops or some of those connections are easily able to unscrew and screw back. So just make sure that you screw it back and just remove any water that you see within those systems.
Does sometimes the water get caught in some sagging hoses and that needs to be taken care of?
That is correct. So any sagging hoses or any lower part of the system or lower part of the pipe, just make sure that there's no water standing on it to be able for it not to expand. Again, the issue here is that water that is standing there is going to expand no matter what once they freeze, and any resistance from the structure could either break it or make some kind of a damage inside.
What about for those pipelines that are underground?
So if it is actually underground, typically they are protected just because of the natural heat from the ground. But anything that is close to the ground surface, again, make sure that you try to find the lowest spot where it could drain out again. Or if you see that there is a standing water, then pump it out, just to make sure that your system is really ready for the winter time.
Once all the water is cleaned out of the system, or as much as can be, what do producers need to do when it comes to closing down the pumping station?
Yeah, so protect the pumping station. So make sure, irrigation system is a good example of the combination of the water, the metal, and the electrical circuit. So we have taken care of the water, but also make sure that there's no open electrical system that are out there. So we don't want anybody to get electrocuted just because we did not turn off the main brake for those system. And again, we might not be able to visit that system for quite a while just because during the winter time, but the wildlife is going to be there, very curious about, hey, nobody's going to visit this. We're going to be curious about, this wire looks nice to chew on. So just make sure that that we are ready for any of those eventualities. And also the wind. Actually, the wind is one other factor that makes some of the wires open. Any wires that are exposed that are also subject to the wind could vibrate over time and may also come loose. Going back to my engineering portion also, we've got different types of metals there, and different types of metal expand and contracts differently. And so the screws could also get loose just because of those different types of metals. So that's a little bit of an engineering part, but again, going back to that idea that if we could protect them from any circuit short or any other electrocution, those are the things that we should be looking at.
And even once those pivot irrigations are shut down, still able to go out there and maybe get some work done so it's ready to go for the next season?
That is also correct. So before really the system shuts down, or if you have an opportunity to ask the dealership or the maintenance people to come out and do some repair on your irrigation system, that's also a good checklist to be able to put in your table or in your to-do list, because we would like to make sure that system is ready to go when we need it during the next season. During the next season, I know that the priorities are going to be planting, spraying, and fertilizing, and the list that we typically think of is the irrigation system. And by that time, we might have forgotten, that there is actually, I heard something knocking on my engine during that time before I shut it off, and we almost forgot that it needs to be repaired. So we would like to make sure that is also taken care of.
As we're thinking about the pivot irrigation system, if it's all good, also just a reminder to producers that sometimes people are doing bad things or trying to do bad things around pivot irrigation systems.
Yes. Unfortunately, we have not heard that here a lot in Kansas. I know that there are some places that is prevalent. But just to make sure that they are in a good place, that you could still check from time to time if there's and away from any curiosity that has a bad intention for the irrigation system. So yes, that is correct. To be able to at least protect them also from human nature, I suppose, from the human aspect of it.
Jonathan, as we wrap up today's conversation, can you just remind us of that quick checklist of what producers should do when it comes to their pivots?
So checklist would be remove as much as possible any water in your system. So drain. These are the easiest way to be able to make the system ready for the next season, and then also make sure that it is safe by making sure that the electrical systems are disconnected and things are fixed as much as possible. So I think I could wrap it down into those two things. Water, remove the water, and keep it safe.
Jonathan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much also for this opportunity.
That was Kansas State University Water Resource Engineer Jonathan Aguilar. If you'd like to read more about getting your pivot system ready for the winter, you can do so by checking out a recent Agronomy e-update article from November 7th. This e-update article is titled Checklist for Irrigation System Winterization. You can find it for yourself by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Again, that address is eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. Of course, we'll also link this article in today's show notes on agtoday.net. While you are at agtoday.net, you are able to catch up on the rest of our previous episodes of Agriculture Today if you missed one. You can also always find our previous episodes by searching for Agriculture Today on your favorite podcast platform. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll have a new segment of Faces in Agriculture. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with another segment of Faces in Agriculture. And this week we're joined by someone involved in agriculture in Jackson County, Amanda Clausen. Amanda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Shelby.
Amanda, can you tell us a little bit about your operation in Jackson County?
I sure can. I'm more than happy to. So we are a small, if you will, say hobby farm in Jackson County. We moved about 3 years ago from the city, Overland Park, and we kind of jumped right in. We started with chickens, and then we were actually going to Wilcott Brewery, and one of the stores up in Holton was having a sale on their turkeys. And I really wanted these 5 turkeys, and I have a tendency to make rash choices when it comes to poultry. And so we went and had a beer and thought about it, came back and grabbed those 5 birds, and that was kind of it. So we've been doing turkeys now for 3 years, and we started out small and grew from there. We have done both heritage breeds and broad-breasted, and have just really had a lot of fun with it. It's been a really exciting, challenging, really experience for our whole family.
From where you started with those 5 birds to where you are now, what have been some challenges?
Oh, goodness. That list is long. But that's a good thing. You know, when we first brought these birds back, we didn't know a whole lot about them. So we definitely had to learn about them. Protection for poultry is obviously something that we had to take into consideration. And thankfully, we had a pretty good setup of keeping them protected. We do have an enclosed space that our birds spend the evenings in, but we are very big on the pasture raise, that regenerative farming aspect of things. How can these birds help us in what we do? And so our birds are pastured. They spend from dawn until dusk out on the land, eating bugs, scratching through things, eating ticks, thank goodness, and lots of other things. So definitely keeping them protected, making sure that they're set up. With the turkeys, we don't really have to worry about that cold weather side of things as we do with the chickens. So that is one thing that we kind of knocked off our list. Finding out what to feed them. What do they best work on? So we obviously feed them a starter and then a grower. We also ferment our feed. So our birds get fermented feed once a day as well, making sure that they can figure out once they leave the coop that they do need to come back at night to make sure that they're safe. That's been a little bit easier with our broad-breasted birds. Our heritage birds have a tougher time with that because they are more prone, they're broody. So they like to go off, they like to find that nice space and make a nest, and they like to hang out there. So that has been a challenge. Also learning some of the laws. What are we allowed to do? What aren't we allowed to do? How does bird pickup work? Processing, if we're able to sell our birds to stores or just people. So learning about all of those different things has been a challenge, but it's all been good. They've been good challenges.
Amanda, as it sounds like you seem to enjoy your birds, what are you looking forward to with them?
We are looking forward to kind of growing this operation, seeing where we can go. I would love to see lower operational costs, lower feed costs. And then there's also getting the knowledge out there of why these birds are superior to the birds that you're going to say, find at your local grocery store, that aren't farm raised, that aren't raised on the pasture. Because, our birds, we really raise them with love. The turkeys especially have such a wonderful personality, and our birds are raised on the land, lots of love, and they're really special to us. So we want to share that with other people.
Amanda, if people are wanting to find out more about your operation called Windy Ridge Homestead, how can they do that?
They can find us on Shop Kansas Farms website.
Amanda, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about your operation.
Thank you very much, Shelby. I appreciate it.
That was Amanda Clausen, who's involved in agriculture in Jackson County. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.